Turns out he's a major cinephile. They don't watch enough movies! It's a very simple formula! And here we go. Howdy, hey you. Welcome once again, or for the first time, to this Pop Culture Palooza podcast, Nack Goes to the Movies. A bit more caught up, not doing back-to-back podcasts still, but we'll get there now that I am NFL Nick after all. We'll address that at the end. But let's, keep this podcast thing going in whatever form it has. So now that that's out of the way, what are we, or you, listening to this week? Well, if you did not listen to our teaser from last week, or you're not following Knick-Knack Movies or Knick-Knack_IC on any social platforms, first of all, do that. This week, we are getting some things that are at least in the newer realm in theaters. Sure, the latest Marvel movie is a bit long in the tooth, but I gotta talk about Eternals before we go hard into getting audio about the Spider-Mans. Gotta get all that audio for the Spider-Mans. Much more recent is the long-awaited sequel to the original Ghostbusters duology, Afterlife, which may be an end cap to a trilogy or the beginning of a new franchise chapter like Jurassic Park did with Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard. Lastly, this episode, I truly love zombie things, and I speak highlier than most of the original Resident Evil movies. I know they aren't award-winning art film, but I enjoy parts of them. Except that last one, they really blew it on like this big setup that ended up being nothing, and they really flopped that last finish of the 6-film franchise. But we will learn together if the latest entry can rekindle not only the film franchise version of the uber-successful video game franchise, but can help make the argument that video game movies can be whatever commercially successful, but just good movies. Otherwise, the burden falls to Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg's Uncharted movie. On a side note, I am super curious about playing the Resident Evil games on the Switch. I know they don't have 2 or 3 yet, but I also know they have spiders as big as houses or people, and that is a no-go for me. Maybe I'll just read the books, TBD. But enough about the scariest things out there. To the movies! Let's be real. Nobody really knew what to expect with the Eternals trailer. Nobody. I mean, I love the tone set with another 60s track by Skeeter Davis, The End of the World. That song is exactly in my wheelhouse, and this is how I find all my new tracks to add to my oldies Spotify playlist. Super thanks to Midnight Mass, Them, and Lovecraft Country for giving me so many new tracks to keep me abreast with what the kids are into, sheesh and all that stuff. I am down for pretty much any live-action MCU thing. I really have mixed feelings about What If still. So yeah, a historical fiction piece bopping around all these cool cultures, a ton of fun powers, and a stat cast including the Game of Thrones reunion I was craving, no matter how brief. Even briefly seeing the Stark Squad together with both Richard Madden and Kit Harington, lay it on me. So who else is in this? Well, name brand wise, I am sure Angelina Jolie and Kumail Nanjiani are the most name recognizable outside of our Thrones vets. Gemma Chan was one of those people returning to the MCU in a different role, which should really not be that big of a deal with her smaller blue person role in Captain Marvel. She's actually been in a few fun things, including another Disney thing that we've talked about, Raya and the Last Dragon, as well as the second episode of the amazing BBC show Sherlock. But everyone has been around on this cast in some capacity. Barry Keoghan, Dunkirk, Ma Dong-seok, Train to Busan, Lauren Ridloff, The Walking Dead, and Salma Hayek from Dusk Till Dawn. We also talked about Stellan Skarsgård last week, and we are once again talking about his son this week. It just bounces back and forth. Yes, Bill Skarsgård is the voice of the sentient bad deviant, which is something we will get into further in this movie discussion. So I pretty much don't remember any of the names of the characters outside of like Icarus. Looking it up, some sounded familiar, Sprite and Cersei, but when you introduce this many characters and lore in one movie, it's a bit tricky to keep it all together. It's like that Warcraft movie that people forget happened. They did not make a full franchise out of that one. Although I think there's clearly, look, MCU, you're going to get your sequels with plenty. It's not like Netflix canceling things like Cowboy Bebop and everything else after one season, am I right? Keeping abreast of all these names and deep mythologies going on. We've all unfortunately seen this happen in some movie or show or another. I just named a few off the top of my head. So, oldies period piece spanning a ton of different cultures. Heck yes. I'm about it. And if you heard from my take on Midnight Mass, any interesting thoughts that come up on religion without being too preachy or on the nose are fascinating with my upbringing and belief system. While this takes place almost too far in the past to be interesting, I do enjoy this idea of eventually, advanced beings coming to a planet and being so advanced they're considered gods. The idea is also brought up in the first Thor, which has some really good ideas, even if the first look at Thor himself is a pale comparison to what we eventually got down the road. And no, I'm not talking about Fat Thor. I'm talking about the one probably somewhere in between, like Thor Dark World Thor. And I know that's a terrible movie, but I like Thor's version there, pretty much up to the point of Avengers Infinity War. After that, it gets a little iffy, but that little middle sweet spot, pretty good. I actually like this idea of the deviants being more or less considered some space creature that has to be eliminated for reasons of greater good and all that. It doesn't appear to be a major threat, just a purpose. When these Eternals finish that, I like that we see how everyone kind of copes with the lack of things to do. I like for sure the ideas pushed of man being a greater evil, especially earlier on in history. The zombie movie sci-fi principle, which the show does have a Walking Dead more recent alum after all. I enjoy that even a bit more. Like the fracturing of the group, some people just want love, sure, but the most exciting character development exploration has to be for me Druig, who his mind control people power. Usually that would be a villain power, but instead this movie makes him the most sympathetic and most caring of the humans, or at least tied for most with clear film protagonist Gemma Chan. Also, every look we get at a Celestial in this movie is huge. There are massive and terrifying in scope and size. Seeing like one small person in relation to this massive 6 circle eye person is huge. Sure, it raises some overall MCU questions about Guardians 2 villain Ego. He's a planet, which is big, but not celestial big. Did he lie that he wasn't a Celestial? I don't know. We first saw some Celestials in Guardians 1 in a story flashback, and even then, they looked a bit smaller compared to the Eternals one. Both this and some of the Thor parts with Kumail's character making references to him and following him around being like a puppy dog or whatever, there are some clear timeline questions. I mean, Thor giving the idea of people treating these aliens as gods with their advanced tech seemingly almost like magic, but yes, the MCU now for sure has magic and vampires and all these other fun things that we never would have thought back in 2008 with Iron Man and stuff like that. So the ageless kid who is an adult thing here has been seen time and time again. I liked it for the most part with Sprite, but the arc and motivations were a little bit flimsy in the end of siding with Richard Madden's character. I get, Tinkerbell and blah, 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 but come on, that was a little much. I love seeing Kit Harington. He did very little, if anything, in this movie, but I loved him existing a bit at least, and his endgame future at least looks to be exciting. The eventual coming together of all the Eternals is for sure fun, especially with some of the stakes of not everyone actually being alive, including the matriarch leader and arguably one of the stronger few they had. I love this setup and call to action. I don't love a semi-all-powerful talking deviant as the true call to action, however, though. It flies in the face of the show don't tell thing. They kind of tried this with Captain Marvel with the Kree skull reversal, don't judge a book by its cover. That, while not perfect, I did enjoy that facet at least. Well, I don't always love how this movie treats the deviants as the villain, having the Celestials turn to being a, dispassionate giant group using planets to birth more of their kind. This unquestioned loyalty up to this point and everyone being robot people, this movie had amazing twists and turns. I mean, the deviants being predators to make intelligent life possible, it's a bit goofy of a concept, but I love it being a clear screw up of the intelligent space titans. It shows the fallacy on them has constantly been a part of who they are, and they're meddling, literally playing God. I think some of the introductions are better than others. Kumail's character, Kingo, and his assistant, played by Harish Patel, are always a riot on camera. There is some humor in this movie, but the best jokes for sure are when those two characters are on camera together. On a little more serious note, I really like the almost PTSD moments with Angelina Jolie's Athena. It teases important plot points, and it makes these characters even more human. Her struggle to control her plight, where losses suffered in different versions of herself, all of it. I was super about her whole deal. The whole mind uniting thing to put the giant space monster to sleep, it's pretty whatever plan. That isn't super exciting with all the powers, the uniqueness not on display for it. But before that happens, I am incredibly all about Icarus, Richard Madden, being a villain all along. Not in the true sense, but in his beliefs and sacrificing his previous leader to the deviants, causing the whole issue. And he's willing to blow up the whole planet for his beliefs. I mean, this was absolutely the best part of the whole movie. The strongest member physically, or at least one of the top two before they killed off, I think it was Gilgamesh. You know, it makes it seem like a pretty can't deal with it thing. And now all these remaining peons, these peasants, have to deal with this seemingly crazy strong being to save the world. I mean, sensational end. Having Sprite, the one who wants to be an adult but can't physically, her existence in the final conflict was not great. I kind of wish she had a better third act before her send-off, which I did enjoy, of, you know, you can be a real human now and all that stuff. And I also kind of wished Kumail was in the final conflict, him just leaving. I don't know how I felt about that. The final battle, ton of fun with all the powers on display. Do I love the super deviant just sort of there and involved? Not really. More of the conflict was a blast, and they couldn't have everyone take on Icarus. It would be kind of boring, and Sprite didn't have enough punchy things to make anything of it. I don't know. I kind of maybe wished Athena's stuff could have led to maybe her being the second villain. That would have made a little more sense in the grand scheme of the deviants not really being that important, but I'm just spitballing here at the end of the day. But most of the conflict, you know, the powers that we did see at least were a lot of fun to watch. And I especially like the end where Icarus wanted to end it all and probably physically could have, but his emotions didn't let him. That love story here was superb. So much so that when he can't live with himself, Icarus, staying true to mythology of his name, flies not necessarily close to the sun, as close as to be literally inside it, and the assumption is he'll not be back for the sequels. I am really happy that they made Druig not a stereotypical villain. Also, random observation. The end was a bit all over the place. The consequences existing made me super curious about the next storyline for this group in the MCU, but I have no clue what this could be. Some of the Eternals are bopping around in space with Harry Styles. Some are abducted by the Space Titans, and Kit Harington is about to play knight in shining armor and pick up his ancestor's evil sword before an off-camera Blade, played by Mahershala Ali, says words. I was mad excited for that, but I need more Blade content ASAP, and if Jon Snow is along for the ride, even better. So yeah, I like this movie. It was not perfect by any stretch, but it was for sure fun and different from another MCU entry. As is the case with every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie I watch, comes the question of where does it sit on the MCU letterbox lists with the rest of the movies I've seen, ranked and reviewed. So I enjoyed a lot of parts about Eternals, especially the parts where it really felt like its own thing. And this movie really did get review bombed hard for something that a little bit uncalled for sure. But it is not a perfect movie. Really excited for the villain at one point in the movie, but then some stuff got a bit muddled in the final third act, so I threw it with other movies with bad villain things. At the moment, I have it at 19th, behind the Ant-Man movies, but in front of the, worse as you've realized, Age of Ultron and the first Thor. This is a fluid list. I might end up boosting Thor a bit in the next time I rewatch that. As always, you can check all my updated reviews and rankings on letterboxd.com. Okay, on to Ghostbusters' third follow-up media. There was a video game that I own, still have yet to play, that was apparently very good. A 2016 movie that was not so good, and now this. But for the most part, and for most people, this will be the sequel they have been waiting for since the 1984 and 1989 films. So there are returns for a plethora of cast members: Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts, and a brief cameo from Sigourney Weaver. But it must be said, if you are here to watch Bill Murray and company lead the show, film in this case, this is not the movie for you. But their footprint can be felt here for sure. Even more importantly, the late Harold Ramis leaves a huge mark on the legacy and plot of not only this movie, but the entire franchise trilogy. There is other media potentially in the works, but for now, yeah, not really sure we can call it a trilogy, so we'll just leave it at that. Now for the new ads. Paul Rudd, yeah, he's pretty fun here. I mean, him in Halloween Kills would have been so good, and I would have been so curious where they would have gone with his character if he was the guy. No way would they have done the same thing in that movie. He was good enough, and this was good enough to, I guess, excuse that to some degree. Stranger Things and It Kid, Finn Wolfhard is along for the ride with Carrie Coon from Leftovers, and McKenna Grace, who I would not know by name, but she has been the young version of a character in many things I've seen, including The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, The Haunting of Hill House, and the show that I keep every so often sprinkling in here, and one day I really do want to rewatch it, Once Upon a Time. The start of this movie is great. We see a figure who looks not unlike what an older Egon Spengler, Ryan Mess's character, would be, but he's always kind of covered in shadow. You know, the glasses and hair are there, but this early ghostly battle is super interesting, and while this movie isn't what anyone would call scary, it's scarier than the first ones, the advances of technology. But the conflict doesn't go as planned, and this leads to his thankfully not too visceral eventual death of the character. From there, things slow down a pretty good chunk with his estranged daughter and her 2 kids, without much, kind of forced to go to his kooky and somewhat haunted farmhouse in Oklahoma. The build is slow, and some of the characters aren't always as interesting or involved or developed. I feel like the friend and romantic interests for the kids and all the kids around aren't the most interesting or too quirky or feel even remotely real. Podcast was a fun character, but almost too out there. Suspension of disbelief is hard when I buy that less than all the ghosts floating around and evil specters. Now, I do really like the main 3 family members. Wolfhard doesn't get the chance to shine much, but Coon and her slow-building relationship with Paul Rudd, who is fun in his own right, it's nice. But I really, really like the relationship exploration of both Coon and her daughter in this Grace. It's another reminder of the strained relationship with, not in this movie, but its presence is for surely felt, Ramis. Both women also experience some form of relationship experience with the idea or the legacy of the Ramis character and his ghostly visage. This movie shines here in those moments. Obviously, the biggest one is, McKenna Grace coming into her own with science-type learning, the ghost of her grandfather leading the way. The Coon moments come much later in the film, honestly very close to the end, but it's a nice final moment. Seeing the invisible hand of her ghost grandfather playing chess with her and leading Grace to do tech Ghostbusters fixing. Oh, those moments were amazing and powerful. This movie has some amazing emotional beats hidden in the classic Ghostbusters humor and the more pedestrian parts. Even reflecting on this, I had to come down to earth with my eventual rating of this movie on Letterboxd. Paul Rudd as a teacher being Ghostbusters junkie, a horror movie buff, and all his moments on camera, from releasing a ghost to having an Ant-Man Baskin-Robbins callback to the mini Stay Puft Marshmallow Ghost mucking about. So much fun. Those moments and storylines were the best for the humor parts for sure. But the other parts of this movie, beside the family motion parts, may not have been as strong. The first attempt to catch a ghost with these kids and the cool ghost trap on wheels remote control thing, yeah, they destroyed town a bit. I mean, who didn't in the franchise, right? But there was cool stuff, the gunner seat on the classic car Ecto 1. The action was cool and small scale, par for the franchise before whatever the big battle was took place. It took a while to get one of the Ghostbusters into the fray, but even that moment of Grace talking to Aykroyd over the phone was fun and had some emotional moments. We knew, Gozer, Zool, and Vince Clortho were all coming back in some form. Without Rick Moranis, you kind of could tell, looking back to the role that Paul Rudd eventually did, to some degree also Carrie Coon, they would kind of be the replacements. But this movie knew Carrie Coon's character couldn't be a ghost dog forever because she had to have her family realization come up at moment. And, the whole Spengler clan had to be together for that. And that last final conflict is pretty strong. The kids all have a hand in the final battle with Zool. The parallels from the first scene in the movie, the original Ghostbusters all showing up, and some of the vintage Bill Murray banter. All of the franchise callbacks are fun. You know, the "Are you a god" thing that was a oops in the first movie. Everyone's saying yes this time around. Very fun nod. If you're a Ghostbusters fan, you'll appreciate a lot of the callbacks overall. And of course, the ghostly visage of body doubles giving, Spangler the ability to be there. No dialogue, which I think is very respectful and nice. It's an option that they went with that was good for the creative choices. But even with that, no talking. Every character that matters had a chance to speak their mind to his spirit. The Ghostbusters are all teamed up, all four. Spangler helping his granddaughter control the proton pack, and all four have the streams crossed like the original. And Coon sharing a moment of love with her deceased dad once again. It was all really good and emotional and a nice end. The end for the new characters isn't all that exciting, but the post-credit scenes are good for the callbacks again. A nice Ernie Hudson and Annie Potts one is fine, but the true gem is the lone Sigourney Weaver moment with Bill Murray playing with the psychic cards like the first movie. They have amazing chemistry still, and that is one of those amazing things I wish we had more of in this movie. That was better than I expected. But it did have some slower parts in the middle and took us kind of away from some of the true magic this long overdue true movie sequel brought us. One day I'll boot up the PS3 and play the game and report back on how good of a story that may be, but my hope is with Sigourney Weaver and Bill Murray having that post-credit scene, maybe there's a future here. I don't want it to just be with the kids. I kind of want to see the originals like everyone, but TBD. On to another long-awaited, not a sequel this time, but a refresh, a reboot for the franchise. Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. One of the newest of, these movies. I think it is the newest. It was close between that and Ghostbusters. A very close release dates. We're really catching up now. And I have for you, for your consideration, the second attempt at a big theater live-action adaptation of Resident Evil. 6 movies in the first time, and starting over here, albeit much more game-based as opposed to glorified cameos from the main series characters with a pretty much action Matrix montage reel of Mila Jovanovic. So, remember, I have not physically played the games, but I'm pretty familiar with the overall source material and the stories of the franchise. So, not all the actors were, straight out of the video game lookalikes to their video game counterparts. The whole take on Leanne at times was not exactly what I was envisioning, but maybe I'm thinking of the confident roundhouse-kicking Leon from Resi 4 and beyond, and forgetting first day on the cop job Resi 2 Leon. And yes, Leon is played by Ivan Jogia, but he was in the Zombieland sequel, actually. And apparently he had a starting role in Victorious. Never thought I'd bring up that Nickelodeon show on here, but here we are. Mostly everyone else was in Netflix and or superhero things. Robbie Amell from The Flash, Hannah John Kamen from the Ant-Man and the Wasp film, Donald Luge from Gotham, who's pretty much a cop in everything else too, Tom Hopper from the Umbrella Academy, and Neil McDonough from, Arrowverse, Captain America, and so many other amazing things. Huge fan of his work for kind of a lesser-known actor, I would say. The leading lady of Claire Redfield was given to Karina Smith, who I really only knew from the last entry in the Pirates of the Caribbean series. If you can't tell, most of these actors I have some knowledge about, but most are at the earlier stages of their careers. I'm assuming the hope here is to cast younger actors that can grow with the roles should a franchise blossom here under the weight of the undead video game franchise that's crying out for a faithful and spooky adaptation. And there really was a lot to appreciate in this way. This movie did to stay true to these roots. The time period, the costumes, and the plethora of Easter eggs. The Jill Sandwich one was truly one of the best it could possibly be. No master of unlocking it, but those words were all spoken by a character who is actually going to be the one that we haven't seen yet. Barry Burton fans, he is not in this movie. The word is he has a role to play in the sequel if that happens. Something to look forward to. It worked for Dune. Please work for Resident Evil, the movie series, Take Two. I know those are very different on the tiered system. Other big callbacks to the source material, mostly, throwaway jokes, but fun for sure. The would you rather be eaten by a shark or snake, both monsters in the first game, and yes, when Jill asks this question to a person, it is indeed the member of STARS who either gets one of those fates in the first game, depending on who you play. Thankfully, this guy wasn't Barry. They didn't say his name for what felt like ages in the movie, and one of the more subtle ones, I would say, I really enjoyed had to be Wesker checking a PDA which looked very similar to an in-game map display. Even the first zombie shot in the mansion was almost identical to the first zombie shot in the game. This TLC to the source material was a really nice touch. Even including super over-the-top locks in the mansion was great to see. Even the end moment was chef's kiss Resident Evil. But let's talk to overall plot here before getting to the final moment of joy or two at the end. Unrelated to this, but Resident Evil as a whole, I'm super curious what the Lance Reddick, Albert Wesker show will look like on Netflix. I know there's going to be a time jump, but I'm just curious. So, to the movie story at hand, though, overall the tone is much scarier compared to previous entries outside of elements of the first movie. The emphasis on actual scares was a nice touch. The Matrix light moments were fun in that movie, but this is what I was looking for, and most viewers were probably right there with me. The movie kicks off with the orphan younger versions of the Redfield kids. They are chilling. It's chilling time as well, with Dr. Birkin, played by Neil McDonough, who I am, like I said, all about in every role. And they throw Lisa Trevor in here, who's a bit off compared to other elements of the video game brought in here. But her arc is nice, and her bond with young Claire is for sure interesting. The slow burn setup in this movie is a treat. Claire coming back home to Raccoon City after a while away to try and save people and expose Umbrella. But all the setup of people getting sick, like, eye bleeding and more. The town being evacuated by the big evil conglomerate company. So much good. Even from seeing the dog we're all used to as the zombie dog eating zombie blood. Sensational. Nothing is exactly the same here as the game. This is a hybrid combo of games 1 and 2 to some degree. There's no tyrants or nemesises to speak of, but the giant eyeball monster is there along with staple zombies, the dog zombies, and even one liquor appearance. So, through the slow build we meet the STARS members, Jill, Chris, Wesker, and more Resident Evil mainstays, and of course, new to the scene, Leon. The other names you'd expect for short term are here too. Brad Vickers, helicopter pilot doomed to be useless, and Chief Irons, who is less sinister in this one, or at least never explored to be. There's a hint of things not being quite right, but that will never happen. We'll never see that to fruition. I feel overall this movie could have either been a bit longer of a runtime to flush things out, or broken up a few, of these stories to kind of give the source material more room. Maybe do one movie a game of some kind. No word on going back to the past with Resident Evil 0 and Rebecca Chambers. Once again, I am hopeful we will see where the franchise goes. Now, I don't know how much I love this version of Jill, whose intro feels a little bit goofy. Like, she's very gung-ho and kind of out of character. But I like the slightly more fleshed out Wesker. He's not inherently an obvious evil blonde villain wearing sunglasses indoors. Yet, at least. The scares here are actually pretty good. The gore is still pretty good, which at the end of the day is all I really wanted. And to see all these video game characters in action together in Raccoon City. We didn't get a lot of Raccoon City, but that's okay. Thankfully, there are no spider monsters here. Really hoping that if this franchise continues, that keeps up and there's no big spider things. I don't need that. So, once again, we start seeing all the zombies. They're like zombie-human hybrids that are like succumbing to the virus. The intermediate stage doesn't always make the most sense, but seeing Claire and Leon have to deal with all these zombie things, it's fun. even though you pretty much know the Quad 4 will make it out alive. The rapport with the Stars team and Chief Irons is a bit inconsistent for me as a vibe. I do like how much everyone makes fun of Brad, who's an actor from Letterkenny apparently, but rightly so with what people would know about Brad Vickers, how they treat that character. So it's interesting the combination of the mansion storyline at the same time as the Raccoon City storyline. I feel like the mansion part was fun, the convoluted door locking mechanisms, all the zombies, the science fiction eye monsters. Honestly, I don't know if I loved all they did with Robbie Amell as Chris Redfield, but the action moments were on point. His stressful zombie killing moments in the dark using a layer to try and see what was going on. I was all about that. It went on for like a little too long, but overall I was pretty about it. I wanted to like the Raccoon City parts, especially with how much I feel like at times the second of the 6 Resident Evil movies we got, which had the most Raccoon City stuff, was probably one of my favorites. 1 was good, but 2 I probably liked a little more. After that, they kind of really go downhill. What we had in Raccoon City was mostly, the orphanage storyline, which was interesting to have this sinister thing related to Umbrella experiments. But the city felt very underpopulated, and I know there was a plot point of, everyone's pretty much left except for the poor people, but a city still has some people. Come on now. I wanted to like the Chief Iron's sinister plot points being alluded to, but they kind of had to do something with it, and it felt like, okay, so maybe that's how Umbrella was getting children for their experiments, but that storyline was cut short as Chief Irons' body was cut in half, and I think that's kind of to blame for the short runtime, and instead we have speculation that may never fully be addressed. I even feel like the Lisa Trevor existence is one of those things that could have been explored a bit further, as opposed to a scary Claire grow up moment where, this scary thing was there as a kid, and now it's a, unlikely assist when the plot dedicated to be necessary. I hope one of the many teased storylines, yes, Wesker being game accurate baddie with Ada Wong in the post credits is one, sunglasses and all, but I hope we see the Ashford twins in the terrifying forms that we know them to be. Something we never really, I think, explored in the first 6 movies of the live action franchise. And if the orphan zombie weapon storyline is a staple of the first movie here, that's a perfect thread to explore in the second one. I feel like we kind of knew what to expect with the end, as with any of these. The first monster became a much bigger monster and many more eyes existed. The train just barely made it out, and at the end of the day they need a rocket launcher to stop it. The end was quick and semi-wrapped up with very little overall Umbrella involvement, at least seen. I think the scientist stuff was great when we had it, but, we saw a few soldiers and it very much felt like an afterthought. But it was a somewhat tidy end with, available for a sequel, but if it just ended there, could be its own standalone movie, I guess. Was the movie perfect? No, I don't think so. And it did little to change the narrative of video game adaptations, but I really did enjoy it, especially in theaters, and hope for a sequel and an eventual endgame with the tone and more overall story beats from the franchise as a whole. The hopes for these now lie on Uncharted, the film, and The Last of Us HBO Max show version adaptations. Let's go Naughty Dog things. So, Letterboxd ratings, what do we got? Well, we just talked about Resident Evil, Welcome to Raccoon City. We're going to start with that one, and it's getting a 3. A lot of these I feel like I bumped down a bit after the fact. I enjoyed it. It was fun. I like the scary parts. I like a good amount of the zombie killing parts, and the setup is good, but there's just some parts that are so unexplored and rushed through, which is a bit of a bummer, and it really makes you feel like there will not be a sequel to this movie, but I really hope I'm wrong and there is, and they can kind of clean up some of the stuff that they didn't get right in the first instance. Eternals, a lot of fun. Marvel movie. It's very different. They did some good stuff. I like that. It feels there's a lot more exciting powers overall, but there's some slow parts. There's a villain problem again. The villain problem could have been good in a few instances, but sometimes it's just bad. I don't like sentient deviants. The end act is a little bit messy, and there's a lot that I enjoy, but there's some stuff that just kind of makes you say, okay. So 3.5 feels about right. Ghostbusters Afterlife, another one that I had to knock down a bit after I kind of took a moment. Ghostbusters Afterlife, another one I had to take down a bit after the initial watch. Like, I was really about the emotional parts. There was some really good, trauma exploration, which, I'm all about apparently, as is discovered on this podcast. But, there were so many middle parts that just didn't really matter to me. I like the more intimate parts for sure. I love what they did with the, original 4 Ghostbusters, the late Harold Ramis, as well as the 3 that we still had. There was a lot of fun. Paul Rudd was good. Should have still been in Halloween Kills, but he was good. Fun movie. Enjoyed it, but was not perfect, and the middle very much dragged on. So that's it for this week's episode. And yes, I have come to the decision that I will have to make this podcast my passion project for all your pop culture needs. It all has to be sent to a bi-weekly format. I will still put all the TLC I can into each episode with social content aplenty to supplement it all, but working in the NFL, I think there is no other way. Now, I may get you a surprise episode here and there to get some back-to-backs, but you will be able to look forward to a action-packed episode with the latest from the MCU Spider-Man, the newest Matrix revisit, and the film that will explore the creation of the Kingsman franchise. So stay tuned for all of that. Continue to check out social channels, Nack Movies and Nack_IC, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and more. Well, that's all for me, so cheers, and until next time, cinephiles. Are you not entertained? I think this is gonna be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. I don't like goodbyes. Let's just call this see you later, Alex.